what I'll do is, so as everyone knows, this is a session to look into questions pertaining to PYQs of social issues and social justice. So this is to do with GS mentorship broadly, but within GS mentorship, of course, particularly social issues and social justice. So let me just quickly, I think in the last session that we had, I had shared, you know, 6 questions pertaining to social issues and 6 questions pertaining to social justice. So let me just quickly share with you some of the pointers related to all the 12 questions, and I'll try to be as quick and to the point as possible. Now, so let's do the social issues first, social issues bit first, and then we can think about, we can look into social justice. Now, the first one, if you have the questions, the first one says national unity without any compromise vis-a-vis social harmony can only be attained by working with difference. So this is basically a question around national integration, national unity. So this is coming from salient features of Indian society, and it's a combination of national integration and unity in diversity. Now, this is an easy question. I'm sure you will agree. It does not really require too much of work and effort. We have to simply conceptualize national unity. So we have to talk about how unity in the context of a diverse country like India is not to be understood as uniformity, which means that it is not informed by sameness, but a certain logic of difference, right? And then we can look into how unity has been conceptualized, and then what is the importance of social harmony. So harmony is also something that is associated with diversity. Harmony is not about, for example, if you have just one community and we say there is harmony in one community, that is not a very exciting. Harmony only works when you have people coming from different communities, different identities, different backgrounds. So national unity, India as a nation in any case is premised on difference. And difference, we know in this context, is the constitutional reference of difference, which is what we call group difference. This is not about individual differences. We are not talking about what I like and what someone else likes. We are talking about cultures. We are talking about food. We are talking about dress patterns. We are looking at belief systems, value systems, etc. So the introduction will be simply about what national unity is in the case of India and why is it important and its distinction. And then we can always move on to the connection between national unity and social harmony. And then the crux will be how a very deep and progressive engagement with difference will go a long way in terms of attaining national unity. So we need to talk about various diversities that we have. So let's say we talk about diversity in terms of region, diversity in terms of religion, diversity in terms of language, and diversity in terms of, broadly speaking, cultures. So cultural, linguistic, regional, and religious diversity. And how, if we were to work with these differences, rather than imposing a particular idea of language or imposing a particular idea of national culture or imposing a particular idea of region, if we were to work with these differences, meaning if we were to take them along and let them thrive and nurture, as opposed to, again, belittling them or shutting them down or, bringing in some hierarchy, then this will, of course, go along. So the core arguments will be along the lines of diversities, as in collective differences on the basis of language. That could be one. Because we also can point out that national integration for a very long time remained a major, it remained a very difficult task because of linguism, because of communalism, because of social inequality, and because of regional disparity. And therefore, now we can think about national unity in terms of, again, working with differences. We need to kind of make sure that the differences remain, but of course, within the ambit of what we call the constitutional morality. So this could be, our first answer. So just looking at national unity, the distinctness of national unity in the case of India, and how that works with social harmony, that's your introduction. And then, because it's a 250-word thing, so your introduction is about 40 words. And then we move on to maybe 4 paragraphs, so sort of detailed paragraphs uh, looking at each of these registers of difference, so language, region, religion, and culture, and then we can always conclude that how, whenever national unity has been put forth in a hard way, in an inflexible way, we have had occasions wherein wherein group identities have led to serious problems vis-a-vis the project of national integration. So that is your first social issues question. The second one is to do with smart cities in India. So it says smart cities in India cannot sustain without smart villages. Discuss this statement in the backdrop of rural urban integration. This is a previous year question. You are to write 150 words for this, and this was asked in 2015. This question. So simply put, again, it's a straightforward question. Does not really merit too much of effort. So we simply get into some factual details pertaining to the smart cities project in India. So we talk about the smart city project, some of its important details as to when exactly did it come into being, what is the core mandate of the smart cities mission, and then we can talk about what are the limitations that smart cities project in some senses uh, is facing, and then how smart villages or the entry of smart villages can in some ways attend to some of those issues. So, for example, smart cities are all about, we know very well that smart cities are not about transforming the entire city. Smart cities are about working on specific stretches of the city. So, in the smart city project, you do not transform the entire city. You simply work on few stretches of the city in terms of drainage, septage, pedestrian working, non-motorable transport, surveillance, connectivity, digital, whatever, AI led sensor traffic lights, etc. So these are just stretches. Now, we know very well that if the smart cities were to focus, if smart cities only work with specific stretches, then what happens is it indirectly or it unfortunately ends up, what should we say, augmenting, or it ends up worsening the social inequalities in a city. So, if smart cities project were to really go ahead and do what they're supposed to do, then what will happen is that already existing better stretches of the city will become much better. And the stretches of the city, or the regions of the city that belong to the poor, or let's say the undeveloped poor regions of the city will remain neglected. So, with smart cities, what will happen is one portion will, of course, become much better, and the other portion will relatively become much worse. Now, it is in this regard that the poor will be further marginalized. And because the poor will be further marginalized, there has to be some mechanism. Of course, smart cities need to be more inclusive. The operational efficiency needs to be extended to other parts of the city as well, but some mechanism needs to be there so as to look into the growing concerns of the poor, the marginalized, the excluded of the city. So, so smart cities focus on energy, transport, education, affordable housing, waste management, etc. But what happens is that in various areas of the city, it might not be able to provide the right kind of quality of life to people. So it works for few, but it might not work for many. Now, this is where we need to talk about the requirement of building smart villages. And when we say smart villages, we are not talking about everything that we have in the smart cities. We are basically looking at smart villages as sites that offer better education, decent health facility, reasonable employment and livelihood opportunities, and only then village economy will be able to hold on to its population. So if we could have smart villages, then village economy will be able to do something about, or will be able to retain its population. It will be able to attend to the requirements of its population, and then of course, you will have more and more people sort of retaining, more and more people staying back. And that is something that will, in the long run, be very helpful for the smart city project. Because otherwise, if smart city thing goes on, and if the village economy does not really take off, if the village economy does not do any better, if the village infrastructure does not become more and more resident, local friendly, then things are only going to be much worse in the long run. So this is also something that is pointed out. One can also think about better, efficient ways of farming, smart usage of electricity. One can think of more robust, inclusive health and employment, infrastructure, etc., to build a smart village. And this will, of course, go a long way in order to contribute to the project of smart city. So all the techniques and technologies, from computing to communication to various other IT stuff, can go in terms of bringing in a smart village, or in terms of putting in place a village that is up to the mark to attend to the requirements of its population. So this is something that we can always. So we define the smart city project, the factuality of it in the introduction itself, and then we talk about some of the core issues that smart cities are grappling with, and then how a smart village can always come in a big way to attend to some of these issues. And then we can in that we can speak about we can write about sorry we can write about what are smart villages, and in what ways can we really bring together rural urban integration. So rural urban integration would mean that they will be connected, but there won't be any migration as such from rural to urban areas. So connection is one thing, migration is another. Here we are talking about how the rural and the urban will come together, because there will be some overlaps in terms of what is happening in smart city and what is happening in smart villages. Then the next question is in relation to shifts in labor and employment. So it says the shifts in labor and employment is, it says the shifts in labor and employment, just a second. Yeah, the shifts in labor and employment sector in India have offered a lot of promise, but not without new problems and challenges. Now, this is also a question that I'm sure you have some hang about of. So we have to look at what new developments in the context of labor and employment, have sort of have led to, alongside promise and opportunities, maybe something like unanticipated consequences, with new problems and challenges. So in terms of shifts in labor and employment sector, we can always speak about a range of things. So we can start with how, there are new developments. For example, if you can, here in this case, you can talk about flexible work arrangements. You can talk about gig economy, that is another, that it is completely transforming the idea of labor and employment. So then we can briefly look into how flexible work arrangements, gig economy, and how new opportunities in service sector and the burgeoning private sector, etc., really bring in a lot of promise. That there is a lot of potential because they offer new kinds of job experiences. They offer hands-on experience. They offer a very different interface for people to work. But so once we talk about how the gig economy, how the burgeoning private sector, and how flexi work arrangements, etc., how they have contributed to something very promising. Once that is done in the first 100 and maybe 100 words, then we move on to what new problems and challenges have come to the fore as a result of this. And now, what are the new problems and challenges? So, one can speak about gig economy contributing to new challenges. For example, there is no union, there is no association, there is no forum platform that can look into the concerns faced by gig workers. In fact, their social security concerns remain very much. There is hardly any insurance. There is no gratuity. They are simply contractual, app-driven workers who are called partners. So gig economy and then gig economy also leads to a more disproportionate presence of male workers. So gig economy kind of further marginalizes female workers, because the nature of gig economy is such that many women in India are simply not able to take up the opportunities that are offered by gig economy, platform economy, etc. So in relation to gig economy, this is one. So there is marginalization of the service provider. There is marginalization of the employee, the gig worker, because the gig worker usually does not have any office space. The gig worker only has a smartphone and and a bike or whatever, and that's about it. So there is no office, there is no union, there is no sense of whatever place in terms of work. So this leads to alienation. This can lead to a loss of sense of identity. So a gig worker is hardly able to introduce himself the way a full-time permanent worker is able to, right? So usually gig work is not really considered as good enough. So this is leading to new problems and challenges. So these are in terms of gender, in terms of sense of identity and alienation, and in terms of again social security, insurance, gratuity, benefits, etc. There are all kinds of issues. So this is only getting more and more informalized. The other is that shifts in labor in terms of also from formal to informal in the employment thing as well, from the primary sector to, let's say, tertiary sector, the service sector. Now, there are newer challenges that are emerging. So, as we go from formal to informal, of course, the situation remains absolutely anti worker. So the spaces where people work, these are spaces that are hardly, that hardly have the right ventilation. These are spaces that are not hygienic. These are spaces that are poorly lit. So these are new. Of course, there is an opportunity in the sense that people are able to work and they don't starve to death. But then there are new problems. There are health-related problems. There are respiration-related problems. So these are new challenges that emerge when we talk about shift from formal to informal, or the expansion of the informal sector, unorganized sector. In terms of employment as well, as we go from as we go from agriculture to the service sector or to the other whatever modes of livelihood, things only get a bit more challenging, because we know very well that recently, I'm not able to remember the data, but maybe some of you already read this. Recently, there was a report that informed us that close to 6 crore people have actually gone back to agriculture. So they tried their luck for a very long time in cities and towns, but of course nothing worked out, or whatever was offered was way below their expectations. So they simply went back into agriculture. So agriculture is, in that sense, once again, the last resort. People leave agriculture, then they realize that perhaps there is no other option but to. So, in terms of employment as well, we have shifts that suggest a certain movement from agriculture to non-agricultural or urban modes of livelihood. But this is, of course, not without challenges. This is contributing to more challenges. So there are health issues, there is overwork, there is work burden, and there is a certain kind of, shall we say, disconnect between life and work. And as a result of that, the worker does not really feel himself. In fact, feels quite alienated and strange as he works. So the shifts in labor and employment is in that context. We can always talk about what I just shared with you. Then the latest one, child cuddling is now being replaced by mobile phones. Discuss. Now, this is again, I don't know, maybe what we can. This is an interesting question. Child cuddling is now being replaced by mobile phones. So one has to think about what kind of a shift this question wants us to reflect on. Now, so in the answer, in the introduction, we can speak about child cuddling as something that is absolutely central to the ways in which families interact with, the younger ones, particularly parents. So that is one. So child cuddling as something that is absolutely central in that sense. But then one can then, and then also when families were together, and one can also talk about the fact that this is primarily to do with joint families, wherein, there were a good number of members to look after children. So child cuddling was definitely a very normal part of children's growing up. However, what has happened is that with the emergence of what I would call dual earner, DUAL, dual and earner, EARNER, dual earner families, जिसको हम कहते हैं career families. So with the arrival of career families, what is happening is that we have both men and women working, husband and wife working, And as a result, the child usually gets neglected. Now, I'm not at all pointing out that women should not work. That is not the suggestion that I have. But what I'm pointing out is that these are new developments. The society has, in some senses, moved forward, and now we have, a setup where it is almost it is almost normal for both husband and wife to work. Now, when they both are working, then of course children are usually left with maid servants, and maid servants usually do not really attend to children as much as they need to, because maid servants, the safest bet for them is to just switch on the television or switch on the mobile phone or a tab, and that's about it. So this is something that is happening, right? So that is one. Then the other thing, of course, is kids imitate their parents. They imitate the ones around them all the time, and because parents are very often on the phone, and they're all the time on the phone, the kids also take it up. In fact, you might have seen that kids pick up different things, as they're growing up. So let's say a year-old kid will just pick up a slipper, and he will place the slipper on his one of his ears, and he will behave or he will pretend as if he's talking to someone. Now, of course, no parent is using a slipper on their ears, but of course, they are using phones all the time. And because the child is constantly looking at their parents talking and talking and talking all the time, the child also imbibes this. He also sort of absorbs these acts and then begins to kind of behave as their parents. So this is something. So one can talk about this in terms of how this is to do with technological advancements. Maybe it's also to do with a massive change in terms of how families now work. Families are going through very, very hectic work schedules. There are all kinds of pressure, deliverables to be given at a certain point. There is overtime. And with mobile phone and laptop, people are never really done with their work. They are all the time glued on to their works. And this is something that is an important pointer, because this shift does this shift wherein people have to really put in a lot of effort in their work. Uh, this this does not let parents bond with their children or with their child as much as they ought to. So this is another pointer that we have to think about. So child cuddling, of course, cannot happen. And then it has all kinds of impact on socialization of children, because emotionally the children are not able to pay attention. Emotionally they do not develop as much as they are required to. There is also delayed speech in many cases, because for speech to be acquired, children have to have they have to have what we call adults around talking, and not just YouTube or some Disney Hotstar, etc. And lastly, one can also point out that this has led to some kind of personality disorders as well in the long run. Because if a child does not get the warmth of parents, if a child does not get the warmth of the human touch, the child will, in all likelihood, develop traits, personality, psychological traits that might not be healthy in the long run for a proper, harmonious, peaceful, calm, sorted, balanced living. And lastly, with children glued on to screens, particularly mobile phones, what has also happened is that the physicality of childhood has disappeared. And that also contributes to, that also negatively contributes to or negatively affects childhood, the experience of childhood. So many children they're just sitting and watching, and they're sitting and watching for hours on end. Now, this is, of course, going to be a serious problem, and one could then think about why there is a certain uh, increase in child obesity in childhood. So this is also something that one can think about, because when screen time is going up, of course, physical activity is going down, and we have kids now who just prefer sitting and watching things on the phone as opposed to going to the ground and running and doing some physical stuff. So these are some of the pointers that we can always share in terms of how this is child cuddling is no more a thing of the future of the present, and it's not really it is replaced by mobile phones because mobile phones are all around us, and parents are using the mobile phones all the time. So yeah, children, of course, it very very negatively affects socialization. Children begin to kind of socialize themselves virtually, so they associate with the screen more than they associate with individuals in blood and flesh. So these are, and of course, one can think about social values as well, that they go down the drains. The other thing that could also happen is that that children are exposed to a very different kind of content at an early age. And the last point that I want to make is, in fact, it is not written anywhere wherever people have written on this particular question. The last point is that children by default, they are trained in a certain slowness, meaning that if children's mind is not it is not supposed to it is not supposed to uh, it is not supposed to, what we say, uh, look at things that are very fast paced, right? uh, so this is again something that we have to think about, because when they are exposed to screens and when they're watching videos, then what happens is that they uh, then they kind of they're looking at things at a very high pace, and uh, then we need to just a second. Okay, so children are then, so there's something very violent about it because they are watching something that is very fast paced. So video is, as a medium, it's very fast. And a child is not naturally inclined to watch a video. A child is to watch the natural settings, let's say birds, trees, open spaces, etc. But when we get them to watch videos on YouTube or wherever, we are actually exposing them to something that they are not really meant for. So this is also another thing that we can think about. That in some senses, it is a very violent thing that um, they get to. The other one is, do you agree that poverty ought to be understood in relation to poor living and exclusion? So this is straight away from Amartya Sen. Basically, Amartya Sen, in his writing on poverty from the vantage point of welfare economics, Amartya Sen was somebody uh, who basically, uh, shall we say, uh, he Amartya Sen. So I was not audible. I guess now I am. Okay, so Amartya Sen was somebody who insisted on understanding poverty from a completely different vantage point. He did not want to push an understanding of poverty that was from the outside, but an understanding of poverty from the inside. So when we make a difference between poverty and poor living, poverty is something that we try to understand from the outside. The moment we talk about poor living, then what we are doing is we are trying to understand it from the inside. Meaning, what does it mean to be poor, right? What does it mean to be poor? And the idea that unless and until we really understand what it means to be poor, we will not be able to do anything about poverty. So this is a very important point, that poor living is something that brings in the subjective aspect, the inner aspect of poverty, the insider view, and the insider view of exclusion, poor living, etc. So it is in this regard that Amartya Sen talks about capabilities. Amartya Sen talks about poverty as a complete denial of freedom and choice, and capabilities being denied their due. The other thing that Amartya Sen also speaks about when he discusses poverty is what he calls negative adaptive preferences. Now, in adaptive preferences, Amartya Sen says that what happens to poor people is, because of certain harshness that they have been used to for a very long time, they end up internalizing the harshness. they end up internalizing things that are otherwise not to be internalized. For example, someone who's been sick all the time will not really consider sickness as a problem. Someone who's running temperature very often will not really think about running temperature as a problem. And we've seen this in our own houses. You know, our mothers very often are running temperature, but they just do not pay attention to it because they think it is normal. It is not really a problem. And very often they just, unless of course it's high temperature, very often they just do not do anything about it. And within a day or 2 or 3 days, they are kind of doing better. So this is what Amartya Sen calls adaptive preference. So one can think about, again, in terms of how, if you go from poverty to poor living, then we are looking at completely different sort of arguments. We are looking at being sick and not being able to see a doctor, being hungry and being absolutely uncertain about availability of food, not being able to read, not having access to safe drinking water, etc., etc. So these are the pointers that we can have in relation to poverty to be understood from the vantage point of poor living. Let me just quickly, because the session is going to end in another 4 minutes, and we will then get on with, I think you will be getting another link through which we can join again. So the point is, what all account for the last question, what all account for the persistence of caste in Indian society? This is simply put again to do with how caste as a structure is adaptive and flexible and evolving. So we first define what is caste, and then we talk about how caste is an incredibly adaptive structure. That it is not a structure that does not fit into whatever new things happen. So the moment new things happen, caste also acquires. In fact, before any change can happen, caste automatically acquires a certain newness. So what accounts for persistence of caste? So one argument could be democracy, that caste and democracy actually are very closely related to each other. So the example of dominant caste, or what Rajni Kothari calls the politicization of caste and the casteization of politics. The other thing is that in occupation, still we have caste as a very important reference. Then through reservation, unfortunately, through reservation, through caste politics, through identity politics, through the politics of the Bahujan, we are constantly looking at caste one way or another. Then let's say now the discussion around caste census. So one way or another, something or the other is pertaining to caste, and the discussion remains. The discourse is around. And this is contributing to what we call persistence of caste in Indian society. इसको हम कहते हैं the resilience of caste. और इसमें आप ये भी बता सकते हैं, for example, there is this scholar A.M. Shah, M for Mumbai, A.M. Shah, S-H-A-H. Now, A.M. Shah writes in one of his EPW articles that caste is something that we need to, that castelessness is something that is a mirage, meaning that a casteless society is basically a mirage. Mirage mane M-I-R-A-G-E. So you know very well what mirage is. When you are driving on a hot afternoon and on the road, it seems like that there is water, right? Because it's a shiny surface. But when you get there, it's not there. But then when you get there, then the mirage is further ahead. So the mirage of costless society simply implies that we think that we are almost there, but what happens is that when we get there, we realize that this is not really, what we say, it's not a casteless society anymore. So it's a beautiful usage, mirage of a casteless society. We are always under the impression that we are there, but the moment we get there, we realize that this is not really what it is. And then we realize that, casteless society is now further away. So this is the mirage of the casteless society. So caste, the elasticity in caste, the adaptability in caste, and the flexibility that caste as a structure offers. And then we can speak about, again, caste politics, caste democracy connections. For example, the OBC question, the regional politics in India. None of this can really be discussed, or none of this is possible without caste. And therefore, caste remains very, very persistent, right? It remains very central to the ways in which we conceptualize our lives on a daily basis. So now with this, I think what I'll do is we can end the session, this one, and then perhaps on the Telegram group, uh, we can, because maybe I was expected to finish in 40 minutes, but I just could not. So I've done social issues. The link will be shared on Telegram right away. And please join us again, and I'll quickly share the social justice, as in, quick answers to social justice. So for social justice, there were 6 questions given. The first one is how effective sustainable development goals have been with respect to poverty reduction in India? Have the measures taken by Indian government been of any merit in this respect? So this is again a straightforward question. So we can perhaps start with, uh, looking at SDGs themselves, and particularly in the context of poverty. Now, what we can, so that is one. So we define SDGs, that, how these are a set of 17, I think 17 global goals established by the UN in the year 2015, and the target year is 2030 for sustainable development. So this is broadly the factual pointer in relation to its introduction. And particularly the SDGs that kind of build upon the earlier MDGs, which is Millennium Development Goals. They kind of bring in more comprehensive approach. They bring in more ambition, and what SDGs try to do is they seek connections between various problems. They do not look at problems in terms of in isolation. They have a certain kind of a multi-sectoral, cross-sectoral approach. So, for example, when they look at things like gender inequality, clean energy, when they look at environmental degradation or health, education, poverty eradication, they see connections between them. They don't really only look at them in isolation. So that is where I think SDGs play a very important role in terms of offering a comprehensive sort of antidote to poverty. So in that sense, one can simply point out how the SDGs have been quite effective in terms of looking at the problem of poverty, because poverty has been, in that sense, a major concern. And there is, within the context of sustainable development, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2019, there is a certain point. There are various pointers that inform us about how more and more people are sort of becoming prone to poverty. So it talks about increasing inequality. It talks about stunted growth among children, globally, of course. It talks about youth, young people, you know, more prone towards, or there is the higher risk of young people being unemployed. Then gender inequality also not really coming across as something that can be immediately achieved, which will also lead to feminization of poverty. And then extreme poverty, although, in sustainable development goals, at least extreme poverty declined from 36% in 1990 to 8.6% in 2018. But poverty reduction pace is not really something that we can celebrate. So the pace at which poverty is reducing, that is not really up to the mark. So these are some of the pointers in relation to what we call poverty. So how sustainable development goals kind of bring in important, interventions with reference to poverty, in terms of mortality, in terms of access to electricity, access to safe drinking water. Sustainable development goals have really pushed things to an extent that poverty does get, in a positive way affected. However, this is not really something that, as I said, it is not really a call for celebration. If you think about the measures taken by the Indian government It's a mixed bag. So although the Indian government has been quite invested in what we call uh, alleviating poverty, and poverty alleviation programs have been central to Indian government strategy vis-a-vis doing something about poverty. So there is growth-oriented programs, there is poverty alleviation programs, and there are targeted focus programs. So, but poverty alleviation programs are huge. It's a huge sector in the Indian whatever engagement with poverty. Now, the unfortunately, the poverty alleviation programs have not really been as effective as they could have been. They have definitely borne fruits. They have definitely done a great deal, but much remains desired. So, poverty alleviation programs, basically, they have not been able to do much because uh, given the magnitude of poverty in India, if you look at how many people, it's quite a huge number that we are looking at. Given the magnitude of poverty in India, the resources that PAPs have, it's way below the mark. So it is PAPs are massively under resourced. Then we can also say that a lot of people who are associated, let's say the government functionaries, etc., who are associated with most of these programs, they are not really motivated enough. They simply consider this as some sort of an official obligation and do not understand poverty alleviation as almost some kind of a constitutional obligation. So, whether we are talking about bureaucrats or we are talking about government officials or we are talking about stakeholders, they are not really invested in it. So the program is there, but people do not associate with that program in terms of a certain social justice ideology, etc. So that is the other thing. Then many of these programs have not really been able to reach the ultimate, the most vulnerable and the most deserving. That has not happened. In fact, on the contrary, what has happened is that a lot of poverty alleviation programs have appealed the non-poor. So so for example, if you think about below poverty line cards, now non-poor ended up getting the BPL cards before the poor people. So this is another major concern that Indian government is struggling with, that how do you come up with a plan for the poor in which the non-poor is not interested in, right? So usually what happens, whatever we bring in for the poor, the non-poor, as in the non-poor, not people like us, but basically people who are, let's say, right above poverty line, who are doing all right, but they don't mind, making use of some government, whatever, welfare scheme program. The last pointer is Dipankar Gupta has written about this, and I think it's a brilliant argument. And Dipankar Gupta writes that there is a difference. He says there is a difference uh, between ending poverty and keeping the poor alive. And Dipankar Gupta's argument is that in India, unfortunately, what we are doing is we are simply making sure that the poor remain alive. We are not doing anything about ending poverty. And he says poverty alleviation programs are not really doing anything about ending poverty. We simply keep the poor alive, which I believe is a great point. And then he also points out that the programs for poor are always poor programs. So a health program for poor, poor program, an education program for poor, poor program. So his argument is that we need to stop thinking about the poor and think society. So he says programs need to be for society as a whole, and only then some kind of accountability, some kind of transparency can be drilled in. So this is something that we have to think about. Pushpu, just give me a minute, give me some time. Let me just quickly finish this discussion, and then maybe we can quickly look into, your question. Okay, I'll just finish this. So this sustainable thing. Then there is how discuss at length the principle. Yeah, sustainable development goals. Done. Then discuss at length the principal reasons that account for short-term welfare measures perpetuating poverty as opposed to alleviating or this is kind of almost the same. There is not much. Basically, again, the pointer could be that poverty needs to be understood before it is something that is defined. So usually in India, what is happening is we are simply obsessed with defining poverty. And as a result of that, we end up coming up with interventions that are not long term, that are just short term interventions. And so immediately they're able to do something about it. But in the long run, for example, let's say the structural reasons for poverty, why poverty exists in India, we don't really ask this question. What we simply do is there is poverty, let's do something about it through public distribution system, through some Rozgar Yojana, through MG, Narega, and so on. So this could be in this particular piece. Additionally, we can always have this idea, this pointer that we have been particularly obsessed with, or we have been particularly occupied with defining poverty and not understanding it. If we were to really go from poverty to poor living, as Amartya Sen advocates, then perhaps we will not really, we will not remain contented with short-term welfare measures. We will think about some long-term, deep interventions. So this is, uh, you know, uh, this is why in short-term welfare programs, poverty ends up getting perpetuated. We don't end up doing something about extermination, or alleviation, or mitigation. We end up perpetuating it. And other than that, of course, the Dipankar Gupta argument is quite good. You can always use that argument. Then list and elaborate on the core interventions that can facilitate sustained decline in maternal mortality rate. Now, basically, we have to firstly figure out why maternal mortality happens. And there is an ICMR report which says that, it talks about several estimates of MMR. So it points out that, so once we go through that ICMR findings, then we can figure out what can be done, because ICMR is telling us what is important to know when it comes to maternal deaths or maternal mortality. So you define maternal mortality. It could be either WHO definition or Ministry of Women and Child Development definition or any other definition. Just define it, and then straight away come to the ICMR report, which tells us about a bunch of things that beg our attention. So it says that the majority of maternal deaths occur to women who are relatively young and had their first delivery, which means that we need to make sure that pregnancy happens after a particular age, not before that age. So early pregnancy, or even minor girls, that can be really a serious problem. So, so child marriage, definitely a no-no. But within marriage as well, some sort of delayed pregnancy. So as opposed to not getting pregnant at the age of 19 or 20, but perhaps a little later, maybe 24, 25, 26. That is when a woman is able to take care of things. She's more aware, she's more informed. So that could be one. So what I'm doing is I'm reading out the ICMR pointers, and then accordingly I'm offering suggestions. So then it points out that again, more than 3/4 of the maternal death occurred to mothers below the age of 30 years. So this is also pointing out that if we can just take care of these age-related complications, we will be able to do something about maternal mortality. 40% deaths were due to early marriage age. So if early marriage could be attended to, then of course not directly, maybe 40%, but some substantial, significant portion of maternal deaths will be taken care of. Then it says main cause of death was observed to be postpartum hemorrhage, postpartum septicemia, and anemia. So, we can always make sure that antenatal care, postnatal care is perfect, right, for a woman, for a pregnant woman. So, and more importantly, institutional deliveries, right? Deliveries should not really take place at home. If you have deliveries at home and if you have an untrained DAI next to you, then even if it's a normal case, it can very well get worse. And, it can be fatal for either the mother or the baby or both. And, even worse, both. Then it is pointed out that 24% of the deaths were observed during antenatal period, 70% in postnatal period, and 7% during delivery. So we now have a very clear understanding how much do we have to attend to where. So the postnatal period remains the most important, the most crucial period. 70% maternal deaths. So postnatal care needs to be given utmost priority, and then following that, antenatal period, and of course institutional delivery with a trained medical staff around, at least a doctor around, so that in case there is an emergency, in case things do not go the right track, then the doctor can always take a few decisions that can very well save the life of the mother. And lastly, more than 60% of the maternal deaths occurred in SC, ST, and OBC households. So, which means we have to once again point out that we need to kind of look into this from the vantage point of caste as well. Poor women, poor women, poor women, Dalit women, tribal women, they are more vulnerable to maternal mortality. So, if we were to think about some of these pointers, it will be useful. So these could be some of the core interventions, but of course, in addition to that, one can always talk about, solid awareness around maternal health, sexual and reproductive health, and ensuring safe motherhood for women, because that is motherhood is there, but is it safe? We don't know. So ensuring safe motherhood is something that can definitely go a long way. Then next one is earn while you learn scheme needs to be strengthened to make vocational education and skill training meaningful. This is an interesting. So we speak about earn while you learn what should we say, the scheme in itself, which is I think by Ministry of Tourism, and then we come to the importance of this particular scheme, particularly in relation to vocational education and skill training. So we can talk about how earn while you learn is, I just want to draw your attention to something that is not mentioned in any of the material in entire UPSC industry. You see, earn while you learn is in some senses inspired by the Gandhian idea of education, which says learning by doing. And Gandhi, of course, did not bring in the income aspect. Gandhi definitely believed that education should be something that shouldn't, education according to Gandhi should not be only about the cognitive. He believed that education should be about your hands, your feet, your legs, and your body parts. So education should be about some kind of training of your body as well. So that's what Gandhi, talked about, and maybe we can bring in Gandhi here, learning by doing, which is what he called education. And he wanted to, he wanted that education because he believed that this education will also bring together different caste sections. Because in caste, Brahmins were only doing the mental work and Shudras were only doing the physical work. And through this learning by doing, Gandhi wanted the mental and the physical to come together. The Brahmins and the Shudras to sort of, not the Brahmins and the Shudras coming together, but the Brahmin conception of education and the Shudra conception, the Brahmin conception of work and the Shudra conception of work, how this could be, in some senses, brought in. I just need to plug in my computer because the battery is low. So I'll just do that. Okay. So this is about that. And then, of course, this earn while you learn scheme, you can always talk about how, relevance to industry can be an important pointer, that whatever we are learning is also alongside relevant to industry, the requirements of the industry. It also gives us in advance, in anticipation, hands-on experience. Some senses it can also be talked about in terms of whatever little economic incentive it offers. Earn while you learn can also lead to some filling of gap in the broader context of skill development. Earn while you learn will also bring together, two different sectors of our society, the industry on the one hand and the school, college, whatever, ITI setups on the other. And earn while you learn is also about, building a certain kind of a spirit of entrepreneurship, a spirit of self-reliant, independent learner in our young folks. So that is another thing that we have to think about. And also one can say that, something like earn while you learn can help India reap its rich demographic dividend transition. So from a jobless growth economy to an employable economy. The second last one is in relation to development and welfare schemes for the vulnerable by its nature are discriminatory in its approach. So this is again a question on welfare schemes, empowerment provisions for the vulnerable, for the marginalized sections. And it says that these welfare schemes are by its nature discriminatory. Now, here it is not straight away talking about positive discrimination. It is, I don't know whether it is, but my hunch is that it is about positive discrimination because you can't call these, development welfare schemes as discriminatory. When you say discriminatory, what you perhaps mean is it is positively discriminatory. Now, one can always write that these welfare schemes or these flagship programs, these provisions might seem discriminatory. I think that's an important one. They are not discriminatory in approach, but they might seem discriminatory. It might look like they're discriminatory in approach because of a lot of things. For example, many of these, all of these programs are actually, they attend to a particular section. So then it does not come across as universal. And that also leads to a sense of exclusion on many people. So people think we are not attended to, they are attended. So in that sense, the sense of discrimination can come in. Then all of these are targeted approaches. So because let's say if we are doing something for the STs or if we are doing something for women, it can always lead to resentment. It will always lead to some kind of a very tight friction between communities. Then if you're specifically looking at reservations, although reservations try to look into marginalization that has happened historically, etc., but reservation is considered as inherently discriminatory because a lot of general category people point out that reservations actually provide preferential treatment and it only caters to the creamy layer and not really the actual deserving people. Then it can also lead to a certain perception of unfairness among other people because the affirmative action program or the reservation thing might just allocate resources to vulnerable groups, and resources already are scarce and few, and this could lead to then perception of unfairness. And then we can always write that while it might seem discriminatory, the fact of the matter is that development and welfare schemes are not negative, or they do not have any undesirable aspect. They are actually quite beneficial and they are necessary because they address historical and structural inequalities. They look at historical marginalization. They genuinely try to engage with communities that are on the periphery or are already subjected to discrimination, exclusion, etc. So we have, a range of programs from provisions for tribal communities to Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, etc. You have a range of things that are empowering various communities, and this is not to be understood as what we call discrimination and discrimination basically. So we have to understand that these schemes do not contribute to just one section of the society, they contribute to the overall development and progress of the nation. Other than that, then you have the next question, which is how effective have self-help groups been, specifically with respect to rural women's empowerment? This is a very clear-cut answer. Just define the self-help groups. How did they come about? So they refer to any self-governed, peer-controlled, informal group of people with similar socio-economic background. Then what are the impacts? So you can speak about economic empowerment. You can speak about the rise of rural female entrepreneurs. It actually ensures a certain life of dignity. There is more social inclusion. There is more social integrity. There is, of course, tremendous capacity building because of self-help groups. And there is a lot of help in the broader context of governance because many of these people, by becoming more empowered, by becoming more economically endowed, they end up contributing a great deal to governance. They really, really contribute. This is again in relation to the SHGs. So these are primarily, and then in the context of in relation to your conclusion, you can always write that, despite the fact that SHGs do this, one can refer to the issues of regional imbalance in distribution of SHGs, meaning few states have much more and few states have very few. So, and SHGs need to be, we need to do away with this rural orientation that they have, because this leads to a lot of problems. Then economically, again, the average size of the loan is very less as compared to the economic average. So this is another pointer that, maybe we need to kind of bring in some parity. And yeah, particularly in states like Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., SHGs have not really been able to do much uh, uh, because of poor infrastructure, because of high incidence of poverty, etc. So these are the pointers in relation to SHGs, and I think this was the last question that I had to look into. And now we can always have Pushpu, you wanted to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
So my first question is, Kale, the question in which we were discussed about the poverty. So first of all, the definition of poverty is itself a very subjective term.
Yeah,
So when it comes to the elevation of poverty, so first of all, the definition of poverty needs to be defined.
yeah. So as I
So
said,
sir,
then
how do we do that?
yeah, so rather than simply thinking about poverty in terms of income deprivation or consumption deprivation, we need to define poverty in terms of restriction or absence of freedom. So this is the typical Amartya Sen welfare economics definition. And
Yes,
only
sir.
when we define poverty from that vantage point, capabilities, freedom, choices, only then can we really push our answer in a specific direction. Is that clear? So that is
So,
something that I would like to, point out, because that's an important question that you share. So we
sir,
need
there is
to.
one
So
more.
हाँ बताइए आगे बताइए.
Sir, the next question that we had discussed that why there is poverty. So, sir, the answer to that is that it is because of one of the reason is because of the colonial legacy. And like Gandhi was against urbanization, and I
हाँ,
believe that urbanization is also responsible for poverty because many people they leave their homes at village from rural area and then they move to urban areas for the sake of job, for getting
yes,
better
yes,
job and better, but that doesn't happen. So ultimately, like in Delhi, for example, there are many people who are living on the street, but when they
correct.
go to their home, their rural place, so they can at least have land on which they can do agriculture and they can earn something. So, sir, urbanization is also responsible for poverty, I believe. So, is it a right thing, sir?
Well, one wouldn't say urbanization, but so for example, urbanization contributes to different kinds of marginalization. Now, urbanization also is a mixed bag. So, on the one hand, urbanization also contributes to job opportunities. We have quite a few people who get to the city, get to the town, and they find something for themselves. So, urbanization is because many of us actually ended up prospering, right? If urbanization hadn't happened, God knows where we would have been. But you're right, urbanization contributes to a specific form of the poor, which is the urban poor. So when we are talking about poverty, there is rural poverty, which is, of course, broadly speaking, all experiences of poverty are the same. But rural poverty is situated in different reasons, urban poverty is situated in different reasons. In the case of the urban poor, we have a very, very deep sense of marginalization and exclusion. Somebody who's living as a poor person in a city is always more painfully aware of his deprivation as compared to someone who's living as a poor person in a village. So
Yes.
urbanization, I don't know whether one could say directly contributes to it, but one can always point out that urbanization as a process also leads to a specific variant of poverty, which is urban poverty, the urban poor, and the sprawling of urban slums is of course a direct result of that, right? It's a direct consequence of that. Colonial legacy, मतलब कह सकते हैं, जाहिर है हम लोग मतलब a lot of problems that we are facing right now is because of what the colonial powers did. So poverty के reasons में हम बता सकते हैं colonial legacy के मतलब when the British left us, we were one of the poorest countries of the world. We were horrible, and we were horrible because the British did not leave anything with us. When they entered the subcontinent, we were one of the most prosperous nations of the world, and when they left within 200 years, we were one of the poorest nations of the world. So one can refer to colonial legacy as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
You, Hariharan's question with respect to poverty alleviation questions, can we add a dimension that government needs to encourage wealth creators? That is, businessmen, irrespective of size and scale of operations, to ensure trickle down effect. We can, Hariharan, that's a good point. But my submission is that, in the past 75 years, we have figured out that growth has not necessarily led to poverty eradication. The Indian state followed this particular approach, but usually what happens is that whenever we have, growth, it just helps only few. So wealth creation is not really a problem in itself, but I have my submissions in terms of how many people will truly get affected by it, right? In relation to how many people will really work. And that's where I have my reservations. So I would say that, if something could be done about the most poor, और in economics जिनको हम कहते हैं the always poor, chronic poor के context में मतलब those who are really in this endless trap of poverty. If something could be worked from there and in a way that only they become the beneficiaries and not the non-poor, something that I was pointing out. एक बहुत big problem is that whenever we try to do something for the poor, the non-poor also enter, and usually they are ahead of the poor. So if something could be done in terms of, as Dipankar Gupta is also pointing out, that the nature of poverty alleviation programs is a bit problematic. He is of the opinion that all these programs that we have for poor people, they are all poor programs. The schools, the health system, because we middle class people don't send our kids to these schools, we don't go to these primary healthcare centers. These guys can just, simply carry on and do whatever the heck they feel like. So we need to think about it in terms of that programs for poor, fair enough, but not poor programs. And the government should kind of bring in stuff that is to do with bare minimum for the entire society and not just for the poor. Because the moment anything is just for the poor, then immediately the quality is compromised. If you think about the midday meal scheme, the quality for a very long time was compromised. If you look at PDS, public distribution system, the quality of food grain was really, really compromised. Why? Because only poor people are going there. Whenever a middle class person is also on the counter, then I don't think PDS will really get into such below average, really, really below average food grain supply giving, etc. So these are, but it's a decent point that you raise, although I have my reservations. Is that clear then? So we have done our. Yes, Vicky, I'm sorry I have not been able to call you back. I've been a bit occupied, but I'll definitely, you give me time till tomorrow, I'll definitely get in touch with you and we will figure this out, how to take things further. I will speak to you and mutually we will find something agreeable. I'll get back to you in relation to the option of federation. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope this was useful. And just keep working, keep writing answers, practicing, and we will have more of these sessions off and on. And in all likelihood, uh, both both of us will benefit from these. I'll get to learn new things from your pointers, questions, doubts, and in all likelihood, you will also get to learn a few things from whatever I say. So thank you once again. All the very best for your preparation. Take good care of your health and stay well. And I'll see you very soon. Yeah. Thank you. I